This is a special edition of Newsbeat from OU Daily. I'm Caroline Leonard, Editor-in-Chief. Today, you will hear from the Daily's news desk about our latest print issue, OU Daily's Fall Magazine. The magazine is on racks now, featuring 5 stories. In this podcast, you'll hear about the behind-the-scenes efforts from the magazine and hear from the reporters about their stories. First, you'll hear from News Managing Editor Alexia Aden about her story on raising rents and its impact on students. Aden started at the Daily in the fall of 2020 and is in her second year as News Managing Editor. Then you'll hear from Assistant News Managing Editor Taylor Jones. Jones wrote her piece about how members of the Student Government Association plan to change as OU moves to the Southeastern Conference. Jones started at the Daily in the fall of 2020. Next, you'll hear from news editor and Newsbeat co-host Peggy Dodd, who wrote about Main Street business owners' thoughts about the district's unique set of challenges and plans regarding the SEC. Dodd started at the Daily in the fall of 2021. Lastly, you'll hear from senior news reporter Anusha Fathapure. Her piece focuses on the hidden barriers and challenges international students face while studying at OU. Fathapure started at the Daily in the fall of 2022.
I'm Alexia Aden, and I am the OU Daily's News Managing Editor.
Welcome to the podcast, Alexia.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So let's talk about your story. Can you summarize it a little bit?
Yeah, so the story is, basically looking into what rent will look like in Norman as the university transitions into the SEC. Specifically, student apartments, the ones that market directly toward OU students, and most of the time they're renting out, a single bedroom, a single bathroom, and a shared living space with some other roommates. And, they're all on individual leases. If you're a student, you're well familiar with that rent structure. But basically, rent has already been increasing in Norman, and this is expected to accelerate as OU moves into the SEC. And right now, the university is still in the Big 12 in its last year, and some students at OU are already struggling to afford these rent increases. So I spoke with the Norman Chamber of Commerce President and CEO Scott Martin. Last year, he visited 3 SEC universities, Alabama, Arkansas, and Kentucky, with the subcommittee of fellow Norman officials, economic development specialists, and marketing strategists. And they saw significantly more apartments, hotels, and housing.
Yeah, so when you were researching rent specifically, what did you find there?
Yeah, so I found a lot of data. In Norman currently, or as of September 27th, the median rent for all property types was $1,300. The median rent for all 16 cities with universities that will be in the SEC in 2024, so including OU, including the University of Texas, that median rent was $1,621. So with these numbers, that means that 12 of those 16 cities, the median rent in those cities are more expensive than in Norman. Just to give you some specific examples, in Austin, Texas, the median rent was 69% higher than in Norman as of September 27th. With that same date, it was 31% higher in Fayetteville, Arkansas, 26% higher in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and 23% higher in Lexington, Kentucky.
Right, and when you're talking about median rents, would that be something that every student has to pay that $1,600, or is that split across roommates, or?
Yeah, so going back to that structure of rent in these student apartments, specifically I was looking into 4x4, since that seems to be a pretty common unit in these student apartments. If you're seeking out to rent from these apartments, you're renting that one bedroom, that one bathroom, and then you're sharing a living space with 3 other people. So that $1,300 is actually the median rent for all property types. So any rental unit, that's including those student apartments, that's including, multifamily units, that's more than just those apartments that are structured toward students.
Right, okay, and you did talk to a couple of students here at OU.
Right.
What did they have to say about this housing situation?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, some of them are already struggling to afford rent. These students have lived in Norman for a couple of years, and each year they've seen their rates increase, and they just keep increasing. One student, Olivia, described, eating popcorn or ramen for dinner to save some money so that, she could afford rent the next rent cycle. And then another student, William, he described working 30 hours a week at a fast food chain while taking 13 credit hours.
Right. And what did Scott Martin, the chamber president, kind of have to say about the situation?
Yeah, I mean, he said that Norman is lacking in all areas of housing, causing the city's current supply to be more expensive. Going back to that point I made earlier, in those other SEC cities, Alabama, Arkansas, and Kentucky, there are significantly more apartments and housing. So Norman is just lacking in that area. And at OU, we keep seeing the student population grow, and it just keeps growing every year. We keep hitting records in that freshman class, and this is reflective of what's going on in Alabama, Kentucky, and Arkansas. They're also seeing their student body increase, and with this population increase, the city's going to need more housing for these students. So to kind of balance those rate increases, he said we are going to need, more housing.
Right. And my last question for you is kind of looking at your story overall. What do you think is the most interesting element of that story?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think one of the points that really stood out to me is whenever I was talking to William, he was describing, he works 30 hours a week. He's making $12 an hour at this fast food restaurant. So whenever you do the numbers on that, 30% of his monthly income is going toward rent. And that means he is cost burdened. And this is similar to over 46% of Norman renters who are low or moderate income. So it's just interesting to see that an OU student, is fitting that category of being cost burdened.
Hi, I'm Taylor Jones. I'm the assistant news managing editor here at The Daily.
All right, Taylor, welcome to the podcast. Go ahead and give us a rundown of your story.
So I did a story over the SEC exchange. Basically what that is, it's when all of the student government associations in SEC schools get together over the summer for this large conference and basically just exchange ideas about improvements to student life and what they can do to kind of just improve the student body.
Right. Let's talk about those meetings a little bit more. What did SGA members learn from those?
So a lot of what they learned is just improvements that they can do to the student body. So I talked to OUSGA President Chris Furch, and he mentioned that he was really impressed by a lot of the traditions that other SEC schools have, like the midnight yell at A&M. That was something. And then the Walk of Champions that I think Missouri has. Another thing that Furch said was super interesting that another school does is that Mississippi State has a partnership with Barnes & Noble, which basically is kind of like a discount for their students, where each student is opted into this program and they pay $20 per credit hour for their textbooks. So it can sometimes significantly decrease the price of those really expensive textbooks.
Right.
Because they're just paying $20 per credit hour, which sometimes is better than, $500 for a single textbook.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked to other college SGA leaders as well. What did you find out there?
So I talked to the SGA president at Auburn University, John David Jones, and he talked about a lot how their SGA had really high engagement. Furch had mentioned to me that Auburn University had about 30% of their student body involved in SGA and voting in SGA elections. So I kind of talked to John David about how that worked there, and he said that a lot of their engagement came from just the SGA being more involved in the OU community. So talking or being online and really pushing the social media and showing their student body that they're always there for them. That was a big thing.
Yeah. And so did anybody give you any kind of ideas that we can expect from OU SGA that they learned during this process?
Yeah, I think that the exchange itself, according to Furch, was just a really eye-opening experience that really helped the OU SGA figure out how they can really implement these new ideas and experiences for their student body as we move into the SEC and as we're hoping to see all this like development, whether that be economically or just enrollment wise. So I think that this exchange of ideas was extraordinarily helpful to them to kind of just figure out how to handle an increasing and more diverse student body.
Right. And kind of looking back on your reporting, what would you say is probably the most interesting part of the story?
I really thought it was interesting how other SEC schools were able to still keep a close-knit community through their traditions and through the experiences they have for their student body. And I thought it was really interesting how, they met even in the exchange to share those with everybody, because that really, paves the way for more ideas and experiences to be shared across different schools. And I thought that was really cool.
Hi, I'm Megan. I'm here with my co-host Peggy Dodd to discuss her latest story in the Fall Magazine special edition of Newsbeat. All right, so for everybody watching and listening, go ahead and summarize your story for us.
Yeah, so I wrote about businesses on Main Street and what that might look like as Norman prepares this citywide plan regarding OU's move to the SEC. So this summer, I noticed that several businesses had been shutting their doors. So I asked one of those business owners, they owned Michelangelo's on Main Street, what happened, and we talked about things like rising rents and insurance costs. While writing this, announcements of other developments, like for the proposed entertainment district in University of North Park, happened. So I wanted to talk about what that might look like for businesses on Main Street and if business owners were worried at all about what that might mean. I also talked about council members. I talked with the Chamber of Commerce President Scott Martin and business owners about changes to Main Street as well.
Okay, awesome. What did those business owners tell you about Main Street? Like, what's going to happen?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I found really interesting is some of the owners I talked to, like Dr. Gabriel Bird, described Main Street as being for the Normanites, basically meaning downtown attracts more people who live in Norman than it does like college students or out-of-towners. It's also a busy arts district, of course, with Sooner Theater, Second Friday Art Walk, things like that. One of the things we talked about was, yes, there currently is a turnover in businesses, but people aren't abandoning Main Street. They're not fleeing. And it's definitely a place where businesses still want to be.
Oh, I totally get that. Yeah. Are people worried about the development in University North Park affecting business development?
So, no, like not at all. There's actually a belief that the entertainment district would bring benefits to downtown. Ward 8 Councilmember Matthew Peacock, he would represent the development should it be approved. Told me he doesn't think it's like an either or thing. Like success in University of North Park wouldn't come at a sacrifice to other parts of Norman. And Peacock is also prioritizing things like defining specific districts, similar to what you would see in Oklahoma City.
What are some plans that the city has in mind for Main Street?
Yeah, so Scott Martin talked to me about like small changes, like placing OU and city branded banners on light poles, which I drove down Main Street literally yesterday and that's already up. So these are just like small changes that don't necessarily cost a lot that Scott Martin thinks could improve the visuals of Main Street. There's also debates about making Main Street a two-way street. Gray Street, which is immediately north, is going to be two-way later this year. So those are kind of floating around right now. There's also a lot of improvements around Main Street, like the James Gardner Avenue extension plan. That would extend James Gardner north to Flood. And then there's also improvements to Porter happening right now. And the county put in some money to fix up the fairgrounds that are on Robinson. So there's a lot going on just like in that general area already. But Ward 4 Councilmember Helen Grant told me they like the idea of a business improvement district downtown, which basically is a partnership driven by business owners where businesses in an area pay a specific tax to the city for maintenance purposes. Helen Grant also hopes that more safe spaces for families and 2S LGBTQ plus community members open up on Main Street as well.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay, for those people reading, listening, or just watching this, what is the most interesting part of your story?
I think it's just really interesting to see how the city is preparing for the SEC citywide, which is something you read in my story and you also read in Colton's story and things like that. I think that's just a really interesting thing to watch. I also think it's interesting that in spaces that have been left by other businesses on Main Street, they're filling up really quickly.
Yeah.
Like Michelangelo's closed, but Beanstalk's going in. Yeah. And the meeting place closed, and that's been filled up. The brew house closed, and that's been filled up. Like, all of these places are filling up. No one is not wanting to be on Main Street. It's not in a state of disarray or anything like that. Like, it's still a thriving district.
Oh, I love that. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for telling us about your story.
For sure.
I look forward to reading it when it prints.
Hi, my name is Anisha Pathé-Pray, and I'm a senior news reporter with the OU Daily.
Welcome, Anisha, to the podcast.
Hi.
So let's start by just you giving us a quick summary of your story.
So for the fall magazine, I got to write about the hidden barriers international students face here at OU, and I was able to speak with some major international student leaders on campus, as well as people, working within OU, just to see how that all looks.
Yeah, so what unique financial and legal challenges do international students have?
Almost every aspect of surviving at college that American students kind of take for granted becomes a huge obstacle for international students. So when we're thinking about, the financial and legal struggles, you have to think about them in the context of how they all compound together. If you're putting aside the already long process that it takes to come and become an international student here, on your visa, there are work limitations. You can't work more than 20 hours, and you have to work in an on-campus job. That means your salary is between $7.25 to $10. And if you want to work off campus, you have to do it for credit hours. And so already your salary is low. So if you want to do something like learn how to drive, it costs money to go to a driving school. It costs money to buy a car. Some students are sending money back home to their families. On top of that, you have to pay for groceries at the end of the month. There's just no better way to say it than it's just hard, and it's a lot.
Right. Okay, so what about the emotional challenges of being an international student?
I think every single college student deals with emotional challenges. So you're dealing with the typical challenges that a college student faces on top of all these barriers that make it so difficult to just meet the bottom line of being a successful student. So being held to that same standard of having to compete with people who don't face those unique barriers make it really hard to get through college. And support systems are also a big deal because often international students cannot participate in a similar way, attend the same club meetings if they're off campus. How are they going to get there? It costs money to go somewhere. So, I was told a lot by international students that they often feel isolated from the rest of campus.
So what did international students tell you about what it's just like to be an international student?
Yeah, every single international student says they love being here. They love being in America. They love being an OU student. They love the community. But what they really want to express to readers who may not understand the struggles they face is that often if you feel that you don't have connections to the international community at OU, it's because of those barriers. It's because of isolation. So what they don't want is for you to think as an American student that they don't want to talk to you. It's just that it's hard. So they want to create spaces where those conversations can happen.
Right. And finally, what did you find most fascinating from reporting on your piece?
This piece is so special to me. My parents are immigrants. I'm a first-generation American. And, my dad is a professor. So often what he experienced first coming to this country, he made a concerted effort as a professor to bring international students and provide those support systems for them. Every Thanksgiving, I had international students at my house, Christmas dinners. So this has been a really kind of full circle moment for me and shown me the other side of, a big part of my life.
Right, absolutely.
The fifth story in this issue is from sports editor Colton Soley. His piece is about changes to Campus Corner ahead of OU's move to the Southeastern Conference and how the city is bracing itself for large crowds and an economic shift. Chamber of Commerce President Scott Martin told OU Daily that the city will be working toward improvements for decades to come. Here's Martin.
You've got, one time to make a first impression, right? So we've got to work really hard to be prepared next summer and next fall for when these guests come to town.
Thanks for tuning in. These longer episodes will be published along with our print publications. Be on the lookout for our upcoming fall magazine. Regular episodes of Newsbeat will air every Friday. Each episode will give you a short recap on what happened on campus and across Norman each week. Keep up with us on Facebook, X, formerly known as Twitter, Instagram, and Threads at the OU Daily, and on our website at oudaily.com. OU Daily's fall magazine is on racks and online now. Pick up your copy today. I'm Caroline Leonard, Editor-in-Chief. Thanks for listening to the special edition of Newsbeat from OU Daily.